It's time to talk about Las Vegas with Ira. Each week, Ira David Sternberg talks with the celebrities, entertainers, writers, and personalities who make Las Vegas the most exciting city in the world. And now, here's Ira.
Anything you want us to be, bring us your fantasy, LV.
My guest is two-time Grammy Award-winning pianist and conductor Peter Nero, who will be performing with the UNLV Jazz Symphony Orchestra in the Gershwin Project this Saturday, November 2nd at 8 p.m. at UNLV's Artemis Ham Concert Hall. That's Saturday, November 2nd at 8 p.m. For ticket information, go to unlvtickets.com/performing arts or ticketmaster.com. And for everything about Peter Nero, go to peternero.com. And Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ira. Nice to talk with you.
Pleasure. You've been a very busy man. You had your first album in 1961, and you won a Grammy Award that year for Best New Artist. Looking back at the beginning, are you amazed at all that you have done in terms of your contributions to music? And I'll go over some of it a little bit later on in the show, but just for you personally, looking back, do you look at it and go, "Oh, was that me?"
Yeah, that's about it. I came along at the right time, because what happened to me back in 1961 would not happen today if I was to start out the way I did then, because times were different. The record business was different. Record companies took an interest in the artists to the point where it was kind of like the old studio system in Hollywood, whereby they signed up artists and they nurtured them and kept at it until, they gave them a good shot to get their foot in the door. It doesn't work like that at all today. Today, the artist has to make his own recording and bring it under his arm with him to a record company and hope that they'll distribute it and then promote it. And it took a long time to happen, but it was a gradual process. So when I was there, they were looking for a pianist, and their theory was, based on previous experience, that a pianist would have at least 20-year career on record if they would get promoted and the record company stayed with them. So as a result, I was able to do 3 albums a year, and I did that for 8 years. And you had to do 3 albums a year, not, if you felt like it or if they felt like it. That was the agreement. And they kept pushing product out and building up a catalog, and at the same time building up an artist. So everything just seemed to come into place at the right time. Simple as that.
And it seems, too, that in those days it was the long-term view, even though they were obviously pressing to turn out more albums, or as you said, 3 albums a year. They were still looking at the long view, meaning that you were going to be around a long time, or other artists would be around a long time.
Yeah, that's correct. It was a different time in history. People thought about the long-term future, not the next day.
And tell us a little bit about, in terms of once you started and you recorded your first album in 1961, that's not when it all began. So you started playing at an early age, obviously.
Oh, yeah. I started at 7 and quit at 7:30. I can start with the shtick.
No, I like it. That's good. But at some point you made the decision this was going to be your life. In other words, whether you played at 7 or you didn't play at 7 or even 7:30, you knew that this was going to be your life. So at what age did you know this was going to be your life?
Well, I think at 7 I was too young to even think that way. But it began to dawn on me as I was progressing very rapidly and thinking that was normal. But it wasn't normal. So it was kind of picked for me. I didn't have much of a choice. It's ironic because things worked out so well, I can't complain, and I'm not complaining.
Right. Well, I mean, you always have a choice. You could have delivered newspapers.
Yeah, true. All my friends were struggling trying to figure out what they wanted to major in high school, and then in college, the same thing. With me, it was they complete that. That's what I was going to be, was a pianist, because I was good at it. And that was the opinion of everybody around me, including the music teachers. However, I always had my eye on architecture, and I thought if I had a choice, I would have been an architect. Now, or I would have gone for it. Doesn't mean I would have succeeded at it.
Right.
So I kind of was thrust into it, and I'm not saying I'm sorry at all. I don't want that to be misinterpreted. I'm very lucky to be where I am, because this business is a crazy one. For every one slot for a pianist on recordings or anything else in the business, live performance, so forth, It's one in a million. How many people are out there banging their heads against the wall trying to get a career going? And it's ironic because it's ironic. I like that.
I like that too, ironic. That's good. Can I steal that from you, Peter?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Okay, good.
Coined a new word.
I like it. No, that's good. When you are playing the piano, obviously you're in a select group. In other words, there are really not that many pianists performing around the world decade after decade. If you had to consider either your contemporaries or others that have that kind of endurance, can you count it on the fingers of the hand? In other words, are there at least 5 pianists that reach that level where they can perform professionally and are still performing decade after decade?
Well, I don't think any pianists, I don't mean keyboardists, but I mean pianists are really coming up at all because the market has just sort of dwindled.
Right, but even when you started or even subsequent to your starting, are there 5 that you can name in addition to yourself, obviously?
Yeah, on the charts at the time when I broke in, Roger Williams, who had already had many hits for the 5 years before I ever came along. The 2-piano team of Ferranti and Teicher. There were other pianists that preceded me.
Did you guys hang around at all together or know of each other?
We appeared on some TV programs together. There was a piano special coming from Wolf Trap right outside of D.C. and a beautiful facility, by the way. And that was recorded and played on PBS, and we were on that one together. But we never really played opposite each other. In other words, I did my spot, he did his spot. We didn't play together. 2 different styles.
Right. If you had to choose a genre, because you're known, I think, generally in one direction, but clearly you have an association, in other words, pop music, but you also have an association with the symphony, and you also have association for genres in between. But if you had to pick one, how would you self-identify in the sense of what your music is?
Well, that was always the most difficult question to answer when I was recording and doing all the interviews and so forth, just like I am now. My answer back then was, because the question usually was, what do you call your style? And I said, the style is that there is no style.
Yes,
and
that's
what
fair.
I meant by that, but I had to qualify it, because I would go by what the material dictated. So if I thought that a particular pop tune sounded like something that Rachmaninoff might have written, I treated it that way. But I didn't make an announcement to the audience saying that this is the way Rachmaninoff would have treated it. I just thought that this was a coincidence that they could both share the same common ground, a songwriter and a great classical composer that wrote pieces that lived on forever. And I'm talking about not a 3-minute tune, I'm talking about a 1-hour symphony, or a 45-minute piano concerto.
Right.
So what I've changed it to now, because it's always been difficult to categorize me and pigeonhole me, crossover.
Or I have a whole new genre for you, Peter. How about synthesis?
That's fine, if anybody knows what it means these days.
Well, as long as you and I do, that's all we need to know. That's fine.
Yeah, that's true. Vocabulary doesn't seem to be the strength of the coming generations, because they've formed their own now.
Well, you've got Twitter and Facebook, so you don't really need too many big words.
I did a line the other night at a concert where I have a improvisation on West Side Story tunes that can go anywhere from 18 minutes to 30 minutes. So I save a lot of time in the concert for that, and it's usually at the end. It's kind of call it a tour de force translated into a flag waver. And I announced something about Leonard Bernstein and about his contributions to musical theater and so forth. And so here is Leonard Bernstein's entire score to West Side Story, and then I follow with #long. Now that's I will tell you that the audience I was playing for at the time, the reaction came from the kids.
Yep, understood.
A lot of the adults don't even know what that means. Now it surrounds us. I don't see how they can miss, but there's so much thrown at people these days that all at once that it's difficult to absorb everything. So the ear becomes selective.
Sometimes you have to have a selective ear to survive.
Afraid so. Well, it's always been the problem is how to market artists. And the best part about it was that in record stores at that time, in the 60s, I like artists like Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, pianist that I mentioned just before. We were all considered pop. We were on the pop charts. And the rock and roll charts were separate and very small. It was in the minority. When the Beatles came over in '64, that changed everything. So pop became rock. I take that back. The pop charts became rock and roll, and the music that was on the pop charts before became easy listening, which really cracks me up because I have arrangements in there that are like 4 million notes in the space of 3 minutes. They call that easy listening. You really got to concentrate.
I guess it depends.
Again, in the record stores, there was no bin that said what I was doing, so they couldn't put the record in. They didn't know where to put it.
Okay, here's what we'll do. From now on, we'll put it in the synthesis bin.
Okay.
That could work.
I like that. If you can convince the record stores, which are going to be a thing of the past very soon, everything is on the internet now. It's all downloadable anyway.
And you're online, too, at peternero.com as well. Now, that's not your real name, is it? Let me rephrase it. It's your professional name, but you have an interesting background. Would you want to share that with us before we take our break?
Yeah, sure. The real name is still Nero. But his spelling was very different because my father immigrated from Ukraine, and a lot of people say the Ukraine, and say that to a Ukrainian, and they'll really get upset because they would say to me, if I said the Ukraine, they would say, well, you don't say you come from the America, you don't come from the Brazil, you don't come from the Canada, you come from Canada, America, Brazil, say whatever you want, but not the in front of it. So, and that's the sensitivity because for 100 years they were captives of the Soviets, and before that, the Tsar. So that's the difference. The alphabet was a Cyrillic alphabet, so
right.
Somebody had to translate it, and they would go by what they heard. And they also looked at documents, and the spelling of that name was really weird because it had so many different variations when it was spelled in English. Anyway, the original spelling was N-I-E-R-O-W. So somebody must have realized that N-I-E-R would be pronounced as Nair, and O-W, like Tchaikovsky, is Tchaikovsky. So the O-W became an O-V. So it must have been Nairov. That's what my father speculates. And then there was some paperwork that I discovered recently that I went through, which was his, and there was I think it was an application for citizenship. So there it was spelled N-A-J-E-R-O-W. The J being pronounced as a Y, so that became Nair also, or as an I. Anyway, that's the original etymology of it. So the spelling is derived by people making an attempt to take one alphabet and use another to explain something.
Well, let's take a break. My guest is two-time Grammy Award-winning pianist and conductor, Peter Nero, who will be performing with the UNLV Jazz Symphony Orchestra in the Gershwin Project this Saturday, November 2nd at 8 p.m. And for ticket information, go to unlvtickets.com/performing arts or ticketmaster.com. And for everything about Peter Nero, go to peternero.com. We'll be right back.
We'll be back with more Talk About Las Vegas with Ira in just a moment. Now let's get back to Talk About Las Vegas with Ira.
Welcome back. I'm talking with two-time Grammy Award-winning pianist and conductor Peter Nero, who will be performing with the UNLV Jazz Symphony Orchestra in the Gershwin Project this Saturday, November 2nd at 8 p.m. at UNLV's Artemis W. Ham Concert Hall. For ticket information, go to unlvtickets.com/performing arts or ticketmaster.com. And for everything about Peter Nero, go to peternero.com. And Peter, because you're performing Gershwin, and Gershwin has had such an influence, it's George and Ira Gershwin, the Gershwins, have had such an influence on American musical culture. When did you first become aware of Gershwin?
Well, the time that I grew up, it was all around me. By the way, Gershwin died in 1937, I believe, at the age of 38. And in 1937, I was only 3 years old. So he was still really writing when I was a baby. Mm-hmm. But he left such a legacy behind him that is yet to be matched. because he did everything. Not only did he write Broadway shows, Broadway tunes, but he also wrote works for symphony orchestra, such as the Rhapsody in Blue, Concerto in F. He wrote other things which never really caught on, but they're excellent. He also wrote Porgy and Bess, an opera. That's a good example of crossover because it was playing as a musical on Broadway. And then it's also achieved opera status when I think the Houston Opera presented it, and they were the first opera house to recognize it as a real opera. You know, it was kind of looked at as it was so far ahead of its time. Let's put it that way. That it was difficult for people, reviewers, critics to figure it out. Simple as that. And I don't know if you know the story behind Porgy and Bess. When it hit Broadway, it really didn't make it, and the reviews were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Reviews by two esteemed Broadway critics and music critics, by the way, besides just writing for Broadway. It really caught on when, after the Second World War, there were cultural exchanges between the Russians and the Americans, and they sent over the ballet, I think it was Bolshoi, and we sent over a troupe doing Porgy and Bess, and the Russians went crazy for it. So that happened very often with anything that smacked of classical music. That it was even the classical artists would have to make it in Europe first before they got accepted here. Because that, after all, is where we started anyway, when we're talking about classical music.
Right.
So as a result, it didn't make it until the second time around here, and then when it opened in the United States again, something like 7 years later after the original. And because of that impetus, it caught on. And I have somewhere buried in my archives, I have copies of reviews by the same reviewers who panned it the first time and then loved it the second time, and it was the same thing. It was not a different production. There were no radical changes in there at all. And the things that they didn't like about it, they now liked, and vice versa.
So it sounds like the critics probably went through a transformation rather than the Gershwins, because obviously it was the same product.
Well, it's just that, the critics are people. They're not machines that can recognize something. So they have to go by their ear, and they have to go by what their ear has experienced before. But they haven't experienced anything like this before, especially when it's popular, when it catches on with people. We're talking about a mass audience. And this is not just something that became popular overnight and then fell off the charts. It's still with us, and it will be with us forever. It was a great accomplishment, and it was a true opera. I think everything was sung, and if there was any dialogue in there, I don't remember. I don't know how many times I've seen the thing, but I've never really sat and tried to figure out is there music behind the talking, or are they just talking without the music? Don't know, but that's supposed to be one of the rules, that everything is sung. Even if you say hello, it's sung. Hello. That's my operatic voice.
That's very good. I like it. Even though George died at a relatively early age, and you were at a very early age, his brother lived on. And did you ever get a chance to meet Ira Gershwin?
No, never did. Never did. Being an instrumentalist, I was more preoccupied with the music than the words. So while I played all the Gershwin tunes, I didn't sing them. And as typical with jazz musicians, they'll take a really slow romantic ballad and they'll triple the tempo and give it a whole new dimension. So the words really kind of pale into insignificance for a jazz musician. And the people that want to hear a musician, an instrumentalist, play that material, they're there to hear the melodies. And those melodies were great.
It just seems, Peter, though, that because you had played Gershwin a lot, that Ira would have just been thrilled that you were obviously continuing the legacy of his brother. Even if the lyrics weren't there, the music was.
Well, I wasn't the only one playing Gershwin, because as you cross over, classical pianists were playing it also. Concert pianists were playing the Rhapsody in Blue. It's a tough piece to play, but they didn't treat it that way because they felt that, well, this is Gershwin. He wrote Broadway songs. He wrote musicals. So he really wasn't a true classical composer. But they were overlooking the fact that whatever he did was successful in that genre. Time came for recognition, and they finally got with it. For me, it's what can I say? It's tunes that you can play over and over and over again. You can improvise on it because there's so much substance there.
I noticed you said twice, actually, the Rhapsody in Blue. So if I were a Ukrainian, would I be offended that you said the Rhapsody in Blue rather than Rhapsody in Blue?
That's very funny. No, as a matter of fact, most musicians refer to it as the Rhapsody.
Correct. When it's done that way, it's the Rhapsody, but the actual name is Rhapsody in Blue, is it not? I'm trying to catch you on this, Peter. That's why
You're right. It's very good. It's very good. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that now. Now you got me going.
you mentioned
10 minutes of that on stage and explaining it to the audience. It's also the Concerto in F.
There you go.
The Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. There's always a bell in front of it. So nice try, but it was.
Thank you.
It's like when somebody says Frank sang it great. Well, who's Frank? You know who he is.
Of course.
They've reached that status where they're known by their first name only, and that's enough. So it's the same thing here with the Rhapsody. You don't have to say in blue, even everybody knows.
Oh yes, absolutely. The Rhapsody.
Even if you don't say Gershwin, it's the Rhapsody. It's Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. That's amongst musicians.
You mentioned about all the jazz in terms of how jazz musicians kind of look at things. You have obviously, at least to me, in your vocal delivery as we're talking, I feel like I'm listening to jazz almost.
Why am I? A lot of stuff that can be cut out.
No, you have a rhythm to your voice. You just have a rhythm to your voice that's jazzy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say in my own unimitable style here. You just have an interesting. You have a combination of East Coast accent and jazz delivery. How about that?
Oh, that's good. Okay, well, now I really wasn't exposed to jazz until I was 21, and when I got out of college and I was playing in the nightclubs, the saloons, the cabarets, and so forth. That's when I was exposed to the jazz musicians and their jargon and their pronunciation and their vocabulary. It was very interesting. It was an interesting time in my life, and also an interesting time in the life of music, because that language that they spoke verbally was very similar to the language that they spoke musically. First of all, it's creative. It's different. And that's an important distinction. And when you're improvising, you are creating. When you are playing a classical piece, you are recreating what the composer wrote. And here, as a jazz musician, you're creating a set of variations based on a tune, but it's based on it. You're free to do whatever you want with it. Doesn't mean people don't like it, but you're still free to do it. And if people do like it, you're lucky.
And that always takes courage to improvise.
Yeah, it takes courage, all right, and it also takes skill, which at that point I could improvise, but the whole idiom of jazz was foreign to me. I was taught the classical style, which is discipline. It's good to have if you're in anything creative. It's nice to have discipline, because if you're going to break the rules, you got to know what the rules are. Simple as that.
I mentioned earlier that you recorded your first album in 1961. You won a Grammy Award that year for Best New Artist. But I also want to point out, for people that may not know it, you obviously received another Grammy, and then you garnered 10 additional nominations, and you released, this is an amazing number, you released 68 albums. That's a lot of music.
Well, like I say, it was at a time when they were building careers, and they were willing to support a recording. I did so many different kinds. I did with full orchestra. I did it with the Boston Pops, the two of them. I did with studio orchestras, about 35 pieces, which is about half of what a full symphony orchestra would be. I also did solo piano albums. I did trio albums. I did duo albums. I did albums with guests. All different kinds of permutations in there. But there was a lot of product out there. And actually there still is, because of every time there's a new change in the format. I came along just when the LP came along, as opposed to, there was only one speed, and that was 78. The LP came along, that was 33 and a third RPMs. So it was another format. And every time it would be reissued in another format, there would be another album coming out. So it was a good way. Plus, then after that was tape, and after the tape was CDs.
Let's not forget, because you skipped one for your singles, which would be 45s.
Singles for 45, yeah. I must have done about a dozen singles, which all wound up at the bottom of the East River, New York. The problem is that the producers, they let me alone when I was doing albums. But when it came to singles, everything was a formula. So the formula was based on whatever was selling at that point. that's what they would want you to do it. So the producer was very strict about the way you played and what you played, and the rhythm section approach. And there was a lot of layering going on also, where they wanted their arranger to write the charts instead of me, because whatever I was writing fit what I was doing, but it didn't fit the formula of what was selling millions of copies. So I was really kind of lost, right? Because that was really not the way to do it, but that's the thinking of the time. And I finally hit with a successful single, for which I got a gold record, and the album followed right after it. That was in 1972. That was the theme from the summer of '42. The Michel Legrand score to that, and because it didn't become a song until later on, a song with words. It made it as an instrumental. And I was given a lot of movie themes to do, but see, the pictures were brand new and they were about to come out, so I never got a chance to really see the picture. I didn't know what they were really trying to portray in the picture. But summer '42, I was given a private screening of it before it hit the theaters, and I got the feeling of the picture as a result. And that was maybe the difference. But also, I had a producer who said, "Do whatever you want."
That's always the best way to do it.
Well, yeah, this guy had a history of rock and roll records as well as my arm. So he wasn't saying, do this, do that. He just said, do whatever you want. And I went to work on it. And I did things in that single that nobody had done before in a successful single. For instance, it started off with violins playing harmonics. And harmonics, for those of you who don't know what it means you're playing on a register that's very high. So it has a very distinct ethereal sound to it. And you cluster that, and it sounds like, to me, like, clouds floating by. And that's laid the cushion in for the melody, which was played by, just a fragment of the melody as an intro, played by the harp. The harp was an instrument that people didn't even know what it was when they were listening to a pop record. Now, the other things where I broke the rules were also change key. In a single record, you always kept it in the same key. You never changed. And it grew and grew and grew and grew and changed key. It was a musical approach rather than a false approach dictated by false premises. But the way they analyzed it, it really wasn't truth at all. It was just the way people were thinking at the times.
Well, we'll see a great approach with you this Saturday, and my guest has been two-time Grammy Award-winning pianist and conductor Peter Nero, who will be performing with the UNLV Jazz Symphony Orchestra in the Gershwin Project this Saturday, November 2nd at 8 p.m. at UNLV's Artemis W. Ham Concert Hall. For ticket information, go to unlvtickets.com/performing arts or ticketmaster.com. And for everything about Peter Nero, go to peternero.com. Peter, thanks for being on the show.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.
You've been listening to Talk About Las Vegas with Ira. Each week, Ira David Sternberg talks with the celebrities, entertainers, writers, and personalities who make Las Vegas the most exciting city in the world. For more information on Ira and the show, go to talkaboutlasvegas.com.